30,000 liters a day. That is how much used oil one company in Burkina Faso says its plant can process, and it says capacity could eventually double to 60,000. But that is not even the strangest part. In another facility, old tires and plastic waste, the kind of material most cities struggle to get rid of, are being processed into fuel. The company says it is producing diesel. Think about that. A black tire sitting in a waste pile can enter one end of an industrial process, and fuel can come out the other. At the same time, discarded motor oil is being refined into new lubricants, while hundreds of tons of plastic waste are being turned back into finished products. So what exactly is Burkina Faso building here? A few recycling plants, or the beginning of an industry that could turn pollution into fuel products and jobs? Because if this can actually scale one of Burkina Faso's most overlooked industrial resources, maybe something nobody thought was valuable at all. It's waste. The first thing to understand is that this is not simply a story about collecting waste. It is about changing what waste is worth. During the industrial visit shown in the footage, officials stopped at a unit specializing in the recovery and transformation of used tires and plastic. The company says those materials can be processed into fuel and lubricants, including diesel and a small amount of petrol. That creates a strange economic reversal. A worn-out tire normally has almost no value to the person throwing it away. It takes up space. It is difficult to destroy. If it is dumped or burned badly, it can become another environmental problem. But inside an industrial processing chain, that same tire becomes feedstock. And once waste becomes feedstock, the economics begin to change. Now someone has to collect it. Someone has to transport it. Someone has to sort it. Machines have to process it. Technicians have to operate and maintain those machines. And the output has to meet a standard that allows somebody else to actually buy and use it. That means the value is no longer only in the final liter of fuel. It is spread across an entire chain of activity. This is why the phrase "tires into diesel" is so powerful, but also why it can be misleading if we stop there. The surprising chemistry may attract attention. The real industrial question is whether the process can work consistently, safely, and economically at scale. Can enough discarded tires be collected every week? Can the plant keep running without constant breakdowns? Can the fuel output be produced at a quality the market accepts? And can the cost remain competitive once collection, transport, energy maintenance, labor, and processing are included? Those are the questions that separate an impressive demonstration from a durable industry. And there is another reason this matters in Burkina Faso. The same visit was not focused on one material alone. Officials also highlighted units recovering used oil and processing plastic waste, presenting all of them as part of a broader effort to reduce pollution while creating economic value. So the tire is only the first clue, because once you start looking at used oil the same way, the story becomes even bigger. Something that can contaminate soil and water is being treated as raw material again. And that is where Burkina Faso's waste problem starts to look less like a cleanup operation and more like the beginning of an industrial supply chain. Used motor oil looks worthless once it leaves an engine. It is dark, contaminated, and easy to treat as something that simply has to be dumped or burned. But that is exactly where this story becomes interesting. During the same industrial visit, officials pointed to used oil collected from garages and companies as an environmental risk. If that oil is discarded carelessly, it can end up in the soil or water and become a source of pollution. Now reverse the logic. What if the same waste is collected before it reaches the environment? One of the companies featured in the visit says it does exactly that. It collects used oil, puts it through a refining and treatment process, recovers base oils, and turns those base oils into finished lubricants for the local market. That changes the economic meaning of the waste. The oil is no longer only something to dispose of. It becomes an input. And once it becomes an input, an entire chain starts to appear around it. Garages become collection points. Transporters move the material. Storage systems have to keep different waste streams under control. Technicians have to test what comes in. The treatment unit has to separate what can be recovered from what cannot. Then the recovered base oil has to become a finished lubricant that customers are actually willing to buy. That final step matters. Recycling only creates economic value if the output can return to the market. A recycled lubricant that nobody trusts, nobody certifies, or nobody wants to use is not yet an industrial success. So this is not simply a story about cleaning up dirty oil. It is a story about whether Burkina Faso can close a loop. Used oil leaves a motorcycle, car, truck, workshop, or company. Instead of becoming pollution, it enters a collection network. Instead of being discarded, it becomes feedstock. Instead of ending in the environment, part of it returns to the economy as another product. That is the circular economy idea in its simplest form. But it also exposes the next challenge. A factory can only process what the collection network can deliver. If garages do not separate used oil, if transport is too expensive, if storage is unsafe, or if the waste arrives contaminated beyond what the plant can handle, the machinery inside the factory may sit underused. So the real asset is not only the refinery equipment, it is the network feeding it. And this is where the story begins to scale. Because the companies in this visit are not talking only about a few drums of waste oil. They are talking about industrial processing capacity. And once you see the numbers, the question changes again. How much waste can this system actually absorb every day? 17 tons a day. That is the processing capacity one of the plastic recovery companies featured in this visit says it is handling now. And the company says it plans to increase that capacity to 28 tons a day. That is where this story begins to move beyond a small recycling experiment. Because once waste starts moving through a plant by the ton, every weakness in the system becomes visible. You need a constant supply of material. You need trucks to collect it. You need workers to sort it. You need machines that can run day after day. And you need a market ready to absorb whatever comes out the other side. The company says it takes plastic bags and used tires and transforms them into finished products, including fuel products such as diesel and a small amount of petrol. But plastic is also being turned back into ordinary consumer goods. Another unit visited during the same tour says it collects and processes around 750 tons of plastic waste every month. That material is transformed into products such as basins, buckets, brushes, and other household items. Think about what that means. The same plastic that could end up blocking a drainage channel or sitting in an uncontrolled waste pile can re-enter the economy as something somebody buys again. That is a completely different way of looking at urban waste. Instead of asking only, how much does it cost to remove this, you begin asking, how much value can be recovered from it? And those are two very different economic questions. But capacity numbers can also be deceptive. A plant may be designed to process 28 tons a day and still operate far below that level. If waste collection is inconsistent, machinery breaks down, electricity is unreliable, or customers do not buy enough of the finished product. So the number that matters is not only installed capacity, it is actual throughput. How many tons really enter the plant? How many finished products leave? How many days does the equipment operate? And how much of the output can actually be sold? That distinction will matter if Burkina Faso wants to expand this model beyond a handful of facilities. Because industrial scale does not begin when a bigger machine is installed. It begins when the entire system around that machine becomes reliable. Collection, transport, processing, quality control, distribution, demand. And this is why the next number in the story may be even more revealing. Plastic is being discussed in tons, but used oil is being discussed in tens of thousands of liters every single day. 30,000 liters a day. That is the processing capacity one of the used oil recovery companies featured in the visit says it has today. And the company says that capacity can be expanded to 60,000 liters a day. That number matters because it changes the scale of the story. At 30,000 liters, this is no longer about a few drums collected from one garage. To keep a plant like that meaningfully supplied used oil has to move through an organized chain. Motorcycle shops, car garages, truck depots, industrial sites, transport companies, collection points, storage tanks. Then trucks have to move that material safely to the processing unit. Inside the plant, the company says the used oil goes through refining and treatment to recover base oils. Those base oils are then used to make finished lubricants for the local market, including motor oils and transmission oils. So the real transformation is not simply dirty oil becomes cleaner oil. It is waste stream becomes industrial input. Industrial input becomes finished product, and finished product goes back into the market. That is a much bigger economic loop. But there is an important distinction here. 30,000 liters per day is stated processing capacity. It does not automatically mean the plant receives and processes 30,000 liters every single day. Capacity only becomes economic output when the collection network can feed it, the equipment keeps running, the product meets quality requirements, and customers are willing to buy what comes out. That is why this number raises as many questions as it answers. Where does all the used oil come from? How many garages and companies are connected to the collection system? How far does the material have to travel? How much does collection cost? How much contamination can the plant tolerate before treatment becomes inefficient? And if capacity doubles to 60,000 liters, can the supply network double with it? These are not small details. They determine whether the factory becomes a serious industrial platform or a large machine waiting for enough feedstock. And this is where Burkina Faso's waste strategy becomes more interesting. The company is not describing waste as something that disappears after treatment. It is describing waste as material that can move back into production. Used oil becomes base oil. Base oil becomes lubricant. Lubricant returns to motorcycles, vehicles, workshops, and industry. That circular flow is where the economic value sits. And if the system grows, the factory is only one part of the job creation story. Someone has to collect the waste. Someone has to drive the trucks. Someone has to operate the equipment. Someone has to maintain it. Someone has to test the product. Someone has to distribute and sell it. Which means the next big question is not how many liters a plant can process. It is how many livelihoods can be built around the system feeding it. The biggest value in this system may not be the fuel. It may be the jobs built around the waste before the fuel is ever sold. One company featured during the visit says it currently employs around 36 people and expects that number to rise above 150 as its collection and processing network expands. That alone changes the way we should think about recycling, because a waste recovery industry does not employ only the people standing beside the machines. It needs collectors, drivers, sorters, warehouse workers, machine operators, mechanics, technicians, quality control staff, sales teams, distributors, and people managing the collection points that keep material flowing into the factories. The companies in the visit also gave much larger estimates for direct and indirect employment connected to their operations. One speaker estimated more than 200 direct jobs and more than 1,000 indirect jobs. Another site reported 128 declared direct jobs, around 60 contract workers, and much larger estimates for indirect employment connected to the surrounding collection and supply chain. Those figures should be treated carefully. They are company and site estimates presented during the visit, not one audited national employment total, and they should not simply be added together. But they reveal something important. The employment potential does not stop at the factory gate. A recycling plant needs material every day. That means somebody has to find the waste. Somebody has to buy or collect it. Somebody has to move it. Somebody has to sort and store it. And as the collection network expands, more economic activity can appear around the plant without every worker ever stepping inside the processing facility. This is where the self-reliance story becomes more concrete. Burkina Faso can import a finished lubricant, a plastic product, or another industrial input and pay for the value created somewhere else. Or it can try to recover part of that value from materials already circulating inside the country. But there is an important test. Are these jobs stable? Are they formal? Do workers gain technical skills? Can collectors earn enough to make the system reliable? Can machine operators and mechanics move into higher value industrial roles? And can local companies build businesses around transport maintenance, storage, packaging, and distribution? Because job creation is not just about announcing a number. It is about whether the industrial chain becomes strong enough to support people year after year. So here is the question. If Burkina Faso can turn waste into three things: cleaner cities, local products, and jobs, which one should come first? Cleaner cities, cheaper local products, or more employment? Tell us which one matters most and why. Because the next challenge is where this entire idea becomes much harder. Turning waste into fuel is impressive, Turning it into a safe, profitable, scalable industry is another story entirely. Turning old tires into diesel sounds like the breakthrough. But this is the point where an impressive idea either becomes an industry or falls apart. The first problem is supply. A processing plant cannot run on occasional piles of waste. It needs a predictable flow of used tires, plastic, and waste oil every week. That requires collection points, transport, storage, sorting, and incentives strong enough to stop valuable waste from disappearing into informal dumping, burning, or uncontrolled reuse. The second problem is quality. Waste is rarely uniform. One batch of used oil may contain water, dirt, chemicals, or other contaminants. Plastic arrives in different grades. Tires vary in composition and condition. The more inconsistent the material entering the plant, the harder it becomes to produce a consistent product coming out. And that matters especially when the output is fuel or lubricant. A customer does not care that the product came from waste if it damages an engine. It has to perform. It has to meet technical standards, and buyers have to trust it. Then comes machinery. These facilities depend on treatment systems, pumps, heating equipment, filtration, electrical components, control systems, and replacement parts. If one critical machine fails and technicians cannot repair it quickly, installed capacity can become idle capacity. Then there is the economic test. Collecting waste costs money. Transport costs money. Energy costs money. Maintenance costs money. Quality control costs money. So recycled products do not win simply because the raw material began as waste. They still have to compete on price, reliability, and quality against imported or newly manufactured alternatives. And finally, there is the environmental question. The companies featured in the visit said they comply with environmental standards and required audits, and they presented their operations as environmentally responsible. Those claims matter. But recycling itself does not automatically guarantee a clean process. Industrial treatment can create residues, emissions, wastewater, or secondary materials that also have to be managed properly. So the real test is not whether the word recycling appears on the factory gate. It is whether the entire process from collection to final residue is controlled safely. This is where the story becomes much more serious. Turning waste into fuel is technically fascinating. But turning it into a reliable business requires something harder: a steady supply of waste, consistent product quality, working machinery, customers who trust the output, and environmental controls that survive expansion. If any one of those links breaks, the model struggles. If they all begin working together, something much bigger becomes possible. Because then, Burkina Faso is no longer operating a few recycling plants. It is beginning to build an industrial system around materials that used to be thrown away. If Burkina Faso can solve those weak links, the story changes completely. Waste stops being something the country only has to remove. It becomes something the economy can use. And that requires a different way of thinking. First, collect it. Then sort it. Process it. Refine it. Turn it into a product. Sell that product. And reinvest the value into a larger system. That is the industrial ladder hidden inside this recycling story. The companies featured in the visit are already showing pieces of that ladder. Used oil is being collected, treated, and turned back into lubricants for the local market. Plastic waste is being transformed into household products. Old tires and plastic are being processed into fuel products. And even some of the residues created during processing are being discussed as inputs for other uses, including fertilizer, activated carbon, and materials that could potentially serve the mining sector. That is where this becomes more than a cleanup operation. A waste system can create one product. An industrial ecosystem creates links between products. One company generates a residue. Another company uses it. One plant needs transport. Another business provides it. One factory needs maintenance. A local workshop develops the skill to repair the equipment. One processing unit creates a finished product. A distributor gets it into the market. And suddenly, the economic value is no longer concentrated inside one factory. It spreads outward. The companies and officials in the visit explicitly framed waste recovery as something that can contribute both to job creation and to a circular economy, while also encouraging industrial investment in environmental activities. That is the part of the story that fits Burkina Faso's larger self-reliance ambition. Self-reliance does not always begin with discovering a new resource. Sometimes it begins by realizing that a resource was already there. Sitting in a garage, stacked behind a workshop, thrown beside a road, buried in a waste pile. Used oil, plastic, old tires, materials that look worthless until a system exists to collect, process, standardize, and sell them again. But this is also where scale becomes the final test. A few factories can demonstrate that the transformation is possible. A national industry requires something much harder: reliable collection, reliable machinery, trained workers, technical standards, real customers, profitable operations, and environmental controls strong enough to grow with production. That is what separates an interesting recycling project from a new economic sector. And if Burkina Faso can build that system, then the most important outcome may not be the diesel, the lubricant, or the plastic product. It may be the capability itself. The ability to look at something once treated as waste and ask a completely different question. What can we build from this? The factories in this story have already shown something important. Waste can become feedstock. Old tires can become fuel. Used oil can become lubricant. Plastic can return to the market as finished products. But proving that a process works is not the same as proving that an industry can scale. So there are 6 numbers worth watching. Number 1, actual waste collected. Not theoretical availability. How many tons of plastic, how many tires, and how many liters of used oil are really entering the system every month? Number 2, actual product output. How much diesel, lubricant, recycled plastic, and other usable material is actually being produced? Number 3, capacity utilization. A plant designed for 28 tons a day or 60,000 liters a day only matters if enough feedstock arrives and the machinery is operating consistently. Number 4, jobs that last. Not jobs announced during an expansion plan. How many people remain employed 1 year later? How many move into technical, mechanical, logistics, or supervisory roles? Number 5, market adoption. Are customers actually buying the recycled products? Do garages trust the lubricants? Do households buy the recycled plastic goods? Can the output compete on quality and price? And number 6, the environmental result. Are fewer tires being dumped? Is less used oil reaching soil and water? Is plastic waste actually disappearing from uncontrolled disposal sites? Because the companies and officials in this visit are presenting waste recovery as both an economic opportunity and an environmental strategy. They explicitly link it to job creation, circular economy activity, and industrial investment. That means success has to be measured on both sides: economic value and environmental improvement. Burkina Faso will not transform its economy because one factory can turn tires into diesel. But that is not what makes this story important. The important idea is what happens when a country stops seeing waste only as a problem to remove and starts asking what can be built from it. A tire can be waste, or feedstock. Used oil can be pollution, or another industrial input. Plastic can fill a dump, or return to the market. If Burkina Faso can build the collection networks, factories, skills, standards, customers, and environmental controls needed to make that transformation work at scale, then one of its most overlooked industrial resources may not be underground at all. It may already be sitting in the trash. Disclaimer: this video is fictional storytelling created for education, commentary, and entertainment. It is not a factual report or official information. Any similarities to real events are coincidental. Please enjoy it as creative content only.